From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics, here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today I'm here with my colleague Adam Kellenhofer to talk about an interview he did with Assembly Minority Leader Greta Neubauer. So Adam, tell us about the interview.
Hi, Kate. Yeah, so we focused on some of the legislative priorities for the Democratic Party this session in the Assembly. Neubauer also talked a little bit about a proposal she made in a WisPolitics luncheon recently to fully fund K-12 schools. That would be a bump from our current two-thirds funding model. So let's just jump right into it. Thank you so much for joining me on today's Capital Chats podcast. Representative Greta Neubauer, you are the Assembly Minority Leader. It is great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be with you, Adam.
Thanks. So I just want to start this off, a fairly broad question here. What are your top two priorities this legislative session to get done?
Oh, it's always so hard to narrow down to two priorities. But I'll talk about two things that are very important for the people of Wisconsin that we hear about again and again in our communities, and I think have some real momentum right now in the state capitol. So the first is around additional investment in K-12 schools, and particularly the mental health of young people. We know that our schools have been struggling to make ends meet for year after year. We've seen referendums across the state. And I think we have reached a point here where I'm hopeful that we'll be able to see some significant additional investment. We, of course, have a record-breaking surplus, really thanks to Governor Evers' steady leadership. And now is the time for us to invest those resources in our young people, including those who are really in crisis due to challenges with their mental health. And then the second piece that I would point to is local government funding. We have been stagnant at the state level in our funding support for our local governments, which means that all of those essential services like our libraries and public health departments, our parks and community centers, our first responders and public safety, all have been on the chopping block for years because our local governments simply do not have the resources that they need to fund those services. So we've seen, communications from both sides here, of course, discussion around 20% of the sales tax collections going towards local government. We're still working out the details here in the Capitol, but I am hopeful that we are seeing this, real sort of renewed commitment from both sides of the aisle on addressing shared revenue.
Yeah, those the shared revenue conversations are definitely interesting to watch. You brought up school funding, and also in the past WisPolitics luncheon where you and Senator Melissa Agard were participating, you brought up the proposal to fully fund K-12 schools. Right now we have a two-thirds funding model. How would that exactly work? And do you know how much that would cost us then right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we of course fund public schools at the state level, and then local property taxes and local support is also critical in funding our public schools right now. We know that this produces unequal outcomes because, of course, property taxes vary widely across the state and therefore the contributions to local districts. And it continues the disparities that we see in outcomes for kids based on income level and race in Wisconsin. So what I hope to do over the next several years is move towards fully funding our public schools, right? I think in the last conversation we had, what I said is if I had a magic wand, right, I would love to fully fund our public schools. And what I think this budget does is it really does move us significantly in that direction. It gets us up to 90% funding of special education over the next several years, and just has a significant increase, of course, in general and categorical aids and other essential funds for our schools to function. So we're moving in that direction. I think we should continue moving in that direction. Think something that Wisconsinites agree on is that they don't like it when their property taxes go up, and they want to make sure that their kids have every opportunity now and into the future.
Yeah, so I guess kind of sticking with that tax issue and schools, Assembly Majority Leader Robin Vos has pitched the universal school choice model. He says he wants, a voucher to kind of follow kids, vouchers and backpacks, some have called it. What do you think of that model?
So right now we're essentially funding two school systems. We've got our public system and we have this private system that receives taxpayer dollars. I don't think it's viable for us to be running two school systems, and especially when the private system does not have the same accountability as our public system. We've had challenges in Racine with some of our schools who are participating in the voucher program, the choice program. And there was very little that anyone could do when there were issues at those schools with accountability because they're not overseen by a school board, right? And they don't have that elected participation in the oversight of those schools. They don't have to meet the same needs in terms of educating every kid who walks through the door, right? So my hope is that we can reinvest in our public schools to make sure that every kid does have a fantastic opportunity there, no matter where they live in the state of Wisconsin. We have, so much work to do in this state to make sure that every kid, as we move forward, is able to get a fantastic education at the K-12 level, go on to get an apprenticeship or get higher education, get a great job, right? Have stability in their life moving forward. And so I just think that has to happen through our public system, where we can have that oversight, where we can have that back and forth with the public on the issues that they're focused on in their schools. And I don't think it's tenable for us to do that in two different systems.
All right, got it. So kind of moving on to budget questions here. It's budget season in the Capitol. There's quite a bit of funding for things that you talked about recently, like mental health resources, school funding, public safety, shared revenue. Republicans, the Joint Finance Committee, have said that they want to bring Evers' budget back to base and get rid of policy provisions that have nothing to do with the budget. I'm not an accountant, so I don't know exactly which provisions are only budget related, but if or when Republicans do pull some of those provisions out, what would you say to them?
Mm-hmm. So I served on the Finance Committee, the Budget Writing Committee last legislative session. And so was part of the conversations where we traveled all around the state. We talked to Wisconsinites, and then we came back to Madison and started taking votes on the budget. What I see in Governor Evers' budget are a whole lot of items that I heard about from Wisconsinites when I was out on the campaign trail last fall, and that our members directly proposed to Governor Evers. There are a number of items in here that are proposals that came out of districts that our members represent from around the state. We have the School Meals for All proposal from Representatives Shelton and Hong, been working incredibly hard with coalition partners across the state. We have proposals in here to address climate change and our state's racial inequities and create good jobs that have been put forward by members of our caucus and the Climate Change Task Force the governor organized a couple of years ago. What I see is a whole lot of things that Wisconsinites have asked us for. And so I hope that whatever the process looks like in this budget, whether that's initially returning to base and then continuing the discussion about these items, right? We know that these are the priorities of the people of Wisconsin. This is what Governor Evers ran on and was reelected in a real Wisconsin landslide on these priorities. And so I am hopeful and would ask, of course, my Republican colleagues to really keep in mind the items that they hear about from people when they run into them at the grocery store and at their listening sessions, because I know that they are often the same items that we hear about in our districts too.
All right, got it. So there hasn't been a whole lot of committee action quite yet. It seems like the latter half of this month, there's been quite a bit of action, and there's been some, I just got back from a criminal justice and public safety committee, and it seemed like there was quite a bit of bipartisan support on every measure that went through that committee, at least public hearings. Are there any other kind of areas you can see Democrats and Republicans really working together on in committees this session?
Oh, it's a good question. I mean, I think there are many. We know that the items that we're talking about, whether that is water quality or expanding access to affordable childcare or paid family leave, when we're talking about long-term investments in infrastructure, right? Or building our workforce and making sure that we're addressing some of those demographic challenges with an aging population. Outside this building, these are not issues that are dividing on one side of the aisle, right? You care about childcare if you need access to childcare for your kid or your grandchild. And so I am hopeful that we'll be able to see some movement on some of those issues. Last session was a particularly partisan session with only 2% of bills proposed by Democrats getting a hearing. I guess I'll say I'm feeling a little hopeful that we're going to see better this session because I think, frankly, the people of Wisconsin made that very clear this election cycle that they want us to be working on the issues that are impacting them and not sitting in Madison and just blocking proposals. Let's say Republicans blocking proposals just because they come from Governor Evers. So I'm hopeful that we'll see some more movement on those items this session. And, in many of those areas, I'll circle back to childcare, right? We really have reached a breaking point, and we know that if we don't extend the childcare counts program, we are going to see providers close, and we are going to see people who cannot go to work because they have to stay home and take care of their kids. So I've seen some recognition of that in the Capitol, and we'll hope that yields some real policy.
All right. So have you been able to talk with Voss or Lemieux at all lately?
Yes, so we're in regular communication, have had some good conversations about the session, and of course, our members continue to meet with folks across the aisle, on their committees or on issues that they're focused on. So we've had some very good conversations, and of course, we're still early in the session. We haven't seen much movement yet, so you can never get your hopes up on the conversations, right? But I do think that we're in a strong position going into this session to be able to get some things done.
All right, got it. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So thank you so much for joining me on today's Capitol Chats. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for your work, Adam, and take care.
Yeah, thanks. You too.
Well, Adam, we'll definitely have to keep an eye out and see if there are any opportunities for compromise between Democrats and Republicans this session.
Yes, Kate, and if our listeners want to read more, they can head over to the website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kellenhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capitol Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.